All right, so let's get on in the next lecture, and that's going to be, or the next concept, and that's going to be functions. So functions are really an important part of coding. They really allow us to take complicated concepts and break them up into kind of more simple chunks of code. And, it allows us to reuse this code as well. So we can break up problems and then we can reuse the logic. Can almost kind of maybe think of them a little as like Lego pieces. You can reuse all these Lego pieces. You build them once and can reuse them. So it's really to make our code simpler and more reusable. There are a couple different ways to write functions in JavaScript. I have two of them right here. There's kind of like an ES5 way of doing it, where we declare that we use the keyword function, then we give it a name. Just like we would with variables, we can name our functions. And like with variables, we want to come up with descriptive names. And then we can come in and we can define parameters to a function. And there can be multiple parameters in a function definition. And you can think of parameters as like the variables that live within the function. So it's its own little application. So these variables are going to live in the function. And we'll see some examples of this. So this is the ES5 way. You'll also see another common way, something called a arrow function, which is a new feature in ES6. ES5 and ES6 are just different versions of JavaScript. But same thing, it's still a function. We declare it as a variable, const function, set it equal, then we can have parameters here, and then we use this arrow and then our curly brackets. So two ways. I'm probably going to stick with this ES6 way, but you definitely will see examples like this online and stuff. And for now, there are differences between these two syntaxes and how they behave, but for now and for a while, we can just assume that they behave the same. So let's go ahead and, actually write a function. So I'm going to come in here and do a say hello function. So what I want to have this function do is I want this function to take in someone's name and just say hello to that person, maybe ask them how they are. So I'm going to write my function. Now I'm expecting this variable to get passed a name, and we'll see what this means in 1 second. And then I can use that name. And I'm going to do some interpolation. Hello, name. How are you? So here's my say hello function. I'm defining it here. This is what's called like a function definition. So you define a function once, but then we can reuse it as much as we want. So I can do like a say hello, and now I can pass this an argument. So now if I run this node, see I have an error. I'm gonna delete, I'm just gonna comment these out. It's because I've declared, the error here is I have two functions with the same name. Doesn't like that because I'm using a const here. So I'm going to go ahead and comment that out. But here's my say hello function. I have say hello, and then here I invoke it, or call the method. So this is where I can pass it the argument. And so this name variable, this is kind of defined right here. It's technically not a variable, it's called a parameter. But here I pass what's called an argument. The argument's Andy, and this name then becomes Andy, and then it's console.log, hello, Andy, how are you? And I can reuse this say hello function and pass it different arguments. So this is the definition. definition. Now we do this once, and then we invoke call the method, and we can do this, many times. So that largely is the concept of function. Let's just look at some more examples. So, and maybe how to do this. So as you're starting the code, you'll notice you use console.log a lot. But really, once we get into React and once we start writing software programs, we really don't use console.logs that much. It's really console.logs become a way to kind of debug stuff. So what really a function a lot of the time does is a function can return a value. So let's look at the say hello function. I'm just going to copy and paste it. This isn't going to say hello. This is going to get get welcome message. Let's just call it welcome message. Now, instead of logging this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this function return, because this is what you're going to see more in the real world. You're not going to see a function console.log stuff. Really, what functions are going to do is they're going to perform, some task, and then a lot of the times they return a value. So let's look at what the return is. So I'm going to say let message 1 equal welcome message. So it's doing the same thing as say hello, except it's returning this string. Now I can console.log message 1. I'm going to comment these out. See, that's just hello, John, how are you? But this welcome message is returning a string. I could also console.log. I don't have to store that to a variable. I can just throw that in here. So console.log welcome message. Well, this welcome message function is returning as a string that's going to evaluate, so I can just log that directly. So that also works. So I can store that variable, I can store a return value of a function to a variable, or I can just use it directly. Let's look at another example of this. So let's say we have like an add function. So an add function, I want 2 parameters. Add 2 numbers. So here I could return 1 plus num2. And yeah, I could say like let sum equal add 1 plus add 2. I'll log sum. Now, when we look at code like this, because you'll see code like this where you're seeing functions being invoked, and then the return values, then another operation being performed. So in this example, I'm calling this add function twice. So how the computer is going to evaluate this, and I'll just do this down here, is it's going to first do this add 1 and 1. Well, the add function returns num1 plus num2, so that'd be return 1 and 1 plus 1, which would be 2. So that would be 2. And then it would come and then perform this function, add 2 and 2. Well, that's going to be 4. And then it would add these 2 numbers, which would be 6. So I would expect sum right here to be 6. So I'm going to comment out these just to keep this clean. And there we go, console.log 6. So right, this add 1 and 1, this is just 2, right? I could actually, instead of throwing a number here, I could throw the add function inside of here. This kind of becomes a little like when you start learning like math with complicated expressions. The computer's just going to evaluate this. So let's look at what this one might be, and I'll just do this down here. So add 1 and 5, well, that's going to be 6. Add 5 and 1, that's also going to be 6. Well, then we're going to add 6 and 6, that's going to be 12. Then we're going to add 1 and 1, that's going to be 2, and then we'd add with the plus sign 2 and 12, that would be 14. So let's see if that's right. If that's 14. And there we go. There's our 14. So the functions, so a couple takeaways here. Our functions can take many parameters. It can take one. It actually doesn't need any parameters. Could have easily just said, have this not take any one and just say, hello, how are you? But I can pass parameters, or I can define functions with parameters. And then when I call them, I can pass them as what's called arguments. And you know, this welcome message has 1, this add message has 2 parameters. Cool. And then our functions can return something. So functions can only return one thing. So let's look at an example of that. You can have multiple returns in a function, but a function will only return one thing. So let's say get shirt. Let's say we have a function like we were looking at earlier with like, should I wear a, what kind of shirt should I wear based on the temperature? So this function is going to take a temperature. Now this is just, I'm just calling this, I can calling this temp, I can call this whatever, but I'm kind of expecting this to be a number. So then I can do a little if statement here. We can start combining some of these concepts we've been learning. So I'm going to say if temperature is, greater than 80 degrees, I can return a string t-shirt. If temperature is greater than 60 degrees, return sweater. Return the string sweater. If it's not, I'm going to return coat. So, as I said, we can have multiple returns in a function, but when a return hits, meaning once we hit that, the function's going to stop. So let's look at this example, console.log, get shirt. Let's pass in a warm temperature, 90. So that should hit. So this should return t-shirt, right? This one get shirt. If I do, 60 degrees, that should return sweater. If I get shirt, that's something below. So if I'm not greater than 80 or I'm not greater than 50, that I can assume is less than 50. So let's do 30. That should be coat. Let's go ahead and test that out. See if those are right. So get shirt 90 degrees. We hit right here. We hit this first if statement and then we return. If our temperature's, not greater than 80, but it's greater than 50, then we return sweater. If not, we return coat. So there's a little intro into returns. So let's go look at something else. Let's go back. I'm going to get rid of these comments. Let's go back to the add example. going to delete this. Let's say our add example takes in, 3 numbers. This adds 3 numbers together. What happens if I call this add function? Let's do this. Let sum equal add, but I don't give this any arguments. Let's console.log sum. That's nan. So here I'm getting that nan thing we saw about. Well, why am I getting nan? Well, because I'm not passing it any arguments. And these variables, we could just log them inside of here. Just log num1. I don't pass it anything. Num1 is going to be undefined. If I try to add undefined plus undefined, that's not a number. So let's come in here and throw in like a 1. Still getting nan, because if I go back into node, 1 plus undefined, that's not a number. So, and let's do another example. Let's say I come in here, I do add 1 and 1, and then I add the string 1. What is this going to be? Let's go ahead and run it. That is 21. How is 1 and the string 1 21? Well, what happens, and we can step in the node to see this. So num1 and num2, that's 1 plus 1. The numbers 1 plus 1. So that's 2. But num3 is now a string. So 2 plus 1, that's 21. So that's why we're getting 21. So something when you're using functions, so when you define a function, I'm kind of making the assumption that I'm expecting when someone uses this function or when I use it, that they give me 3 numbers. If they don't give me 3 numbers, if let's say for instance, if they give me 2, I'm going to get nan. If they give me a string, I'm going to get back, 21. And that's actually, it's not going to be a number. That's actually a string, that 21 right there. Just to show you type of sum. That is a string. So the takeaway here is, as you go further along, developing and, in this course, it's really important to start paying attention to what kind of data things are what you expect them to be. So when I'm defining a function, I'm calling these parameters num1, num2, num3, and I'm using them in here, but I'm expecting that when I actually use the function, that people give me actual numbers to add. And we'll talk a lot more about this, but that's kind of the first little intro into that. So these are the basics of functions. Just to review, functions allow us to break our code up into smaller chunks, and they allow us to reuse logic, which makes our code easier to read. It makes it more easy to code. It makes it more easy to test, and it makes it easier to write. And functions have a name. We want our name to be descriptive, like variables. I could call this X, and that would still work. But that I want the name of my function to describe what it's doing. Functions, I can define them to take parameters that I can then use, and you can think of these parameters as local variables to just this function. And functions can return a value, and they can return one value. Cool. think that's good for now. We're going to spend a lot more time talking about functions, but that's a good little brief intro into functions.